In a fiery exchange on The View, Senator Tim Scott didn't hold back when he called out the show's hosts for what he described as hypocrisy and racial bias. The South Carolina Republican, who has long been a vocal advocate for racial unity and opportunity, found himself embroiled in a heated discussion with the panel, which included Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, and Ana Navarro. The exchange was sparked by a conversation on race in America, a topic that has often been a source of division in American politics and media. As the hosts of The View discussed racial inequality, reparations, and the role of race in contemporary American life, Scott's views sharply contrasted with the panel's more progressive stance. What followed was a clash of ideologies that turned personal and political in equal measure. The tension builds. The segment began innocuously enough, with the hosts discussing ongoing racial disparities in the United States, including wealth inequality and the Black Lives Matter movement. However, things quickly took a turn when Tim Scott, who is the only Black Republican in the Senate, weighed in on the conversation. He began by acknowledging the challenges that Black Americans face, but argued that the focus should be on solutions rather than division. "I don't deny that there are disparities," Scott said. "But we should be focused on empowering people, not creating more division. We have to create opportunity for everyone, and that means addressing the root causes of inequality, not just the symptoms." The hosts, particularly Joy Behar and Sunny Hostin, were quick to challenge Scott's views, questioning whether his optimism about progress for Black Americans was grounded in reality. Behar pressed him on his support for policies she believed didn't do enough to address racial injustice, while Hostin pointed out that Scott's position as a Black man in Congress made him an outlier, with little understanding of the struggles of everyday people. The allegations of hypocrisy. Things heated up when Scott responded to the panel's criticisms by accusing the hosts of hypocrisy. "You all sit here talking about racial inequality, but you ignore the very solutions that could help fix it," Scott asserted. "You tell people that the system is broken, but you don't want to fix it, you want to tear it down." Scott went on to accuse the hosts of perpetuating a narrative of victimhood instead of promoting policies that foster empowerment. "I'm tired of hearing that everything is about race. There's a bigger picture. Education, economic growth, opportunity. These are the things that can change lives," he said, challenging the idea that racial inequity could only be solved by focusing on identity politics. Sunny Hostin quickly fired back, accusing Scott of ignoring the reality of systemic racism. "You can't just ignore the fact that racism exists in this country," Hostin insisted. "You've benefited from your position, but that doesn't mean that everyone else has had the same opportunities." Scott responded with a pointed retort. "Just because I'm successful doesn't mean I don't see the problems. But I also believe that the solutions lie in hard work and opportunity, not in blaming others or waiting for someone to give us something." It was at this moment that Scott leveled his accusation of hypocrisy, calling out the panel for their selective outrage. "It's easy to talk about inequality when you're sitting in a studio, making millions of dollars, but it's the people who are struggling in inner cities and rural areas who need real solutions. You all sit on your high horses, but you've never had to work your way out of poverty," he said, turning to the hosts with a pointed look. The racial bias charge. The conversation took another turn when Whoopi Goldberg, known for her passionate views on race, entered the fray. Goldberg accused Scott of downplaying the struggles of Black Americans and acting as if racism wasn't a pervasive issue in the U.S. She expressed disbelief that a Black man like Scott could be so out of touch with the everyday challenges faced by people of color. "That's the problem, Tim. You've been inside the system so long that you don't see how broken it really is," Goldberg said. "You've been accepted by the very people who are perpetuating this system of inequality." Tim Scott, visibly frustrated but composed, responded, "You're telling me that because I've succeeded, I don't understand the issues? I'm telling you that I've lived the challenges. I grew up in poverty. I've had to work harder than most people to get where I am. But that doesn't mean the answer is to tear down the system. The answer is to fix it." Scott's passionate defense of his position seemed to hit a nerve with Goldberg, and the debate became more heated as she continued to press him on his views. The larger conversation about race and opportunity. As the debate reached its peak, Tim Scott took a step back and addressed the larger issue at hand, the idea that race should be the central focus of political discourse. He emphasized that while racism certainly still exists, it shouldn't be used as a crutch to avoid addressing other critical issues, like education and job creation. We need to talk about race, but we also need to talk about what's going to make a difference in people's lives, Scott said. If we focus on creating opportunities for everyone, regardless of race, that's how we close the wealth gap. That's how we build the kind of country where anyone, Black, white, Latino, Asian, can succeed. In the end, the discussion didn't necessarily lead to consensus, but it did underscore the deep ideological divide on how to address race and inequality in America. Tim Scott's impassioned defense of his perspective, despite fierce opposition from the panel, highlighted the stark contrast between conservative and progressive views on race and opportunity. The fallout and aftermath. Following the broadcast, social media exploded with reactions to the exchange. Supporters of Scott praised him for standing up to the liberal panel and articulating a message of unity and self-empowerment. Tim Scott is speaking truth, one Twitter user wrote. He's not letting them push the narrative of victimhood. On the other hand, critics of Scott argued that his perspective was overly simplistic and ignored the complexities of systemic racism. Tim Scott is privileged and out of touch with reality, one commenter wrote. He can't understand what it's like for people who don't have the opportunities he had. As the debate rages on, it's clear that the conversation about race and opportunity in America will continue to be a contentious one. Tim Scott's appearance on The View served as yet another reminder of the deep divisions in the country and the challenges of finding common ground in an increasingly polarized political climate. Conclusion. In this dramatic exchange on The View, Tim Scott took a firm stand against what he saw as the hypocrisy and racial bias of the show's hosts. By challenging the left's narrative on race and offering his own solutions rooted in empowerment, opportunity, and personal responsibility, Scott sought to shift the conversation toward a more positive, forward-thinking approach. While his views may have drawn sharp criticism from the panel, they also sparked an important conversation about the future of race relations in America and how best to address the systemic issues facing marginalized communities. Whether one agrees with his view or not, Tim Scott's presence on The View made it clear that the debate is far from over.